Everybody, welcome to the breakdown. I'm so excited I get to talk to my very good friend Joyce Vance today, mostly because she's amazing, but also because she has a new book out. And I'm so excited. There it is. We're going to talk about that today because there's a lot in it. It's chock full. It is a rich book, and it's so easy to read and so well written and so important for what's happening right now. It's so timely. I don't know how you got a book out in a timely fashion, but you managed to do it.
I didn't know any better than to agree to do it really quickly. Had I known, I would not have done it.
Because everybody knows how long it takes to get a book out. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about that. Show us the book again, and let's talk about what prompted you to write it. Giving up.
The book?
And it's a manual. It's a clarion call. There's so much important stuff in here. Let's talk about, first of all, the clear analysis of our current situation that is in this book, because that, for understanding the problem, is step one in solving the problem. So
Yes.
talk a little bit about that.
So look, I'm not going to tell you anything that y'all don't already know. We're in a dangerous moment. And something that I say that I've come to think about more and more is that when we talk about Trump as a king is a nice word for dictator. We are perilously close to dictatorship because we have a president who wants to assume all the power of government for himself. And I think the biggest danger in this moment is one we sometimes overlook. It's our sense that his rise to power is inevitable, and that's what he wants people to think. He's invincible, it's automatic, nothing can stop him. Well, we saw on Saturday that when 7 million of us turn out on a single day, that cramps his style just a little bit. You know, he's reduced to sending out videos of himself as the king of poop. I think it works when we do that, and I think that we should revel in our own power and strength.
Yeah, and not only that, he tears down the East Wing facade of the White House. I think that was honestly kind of a retaliation for, before he had the permits or anything like that. Because watching it had the desired effect I think he wanted it to have, at least on me, which was, it felt like a gut punch. And the metaphor, Joyce, is not lost on me. I read a lot of Tim Snyder. I read a lot of Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Now I read a lot of Joyce Vance. And we always talk about sort of this intangible idea of dismantling our institutions, and he is literally doing so. And I
And
think that
he's sending the message that he can do it and no one can stop him, right? We're in the middle of a shutdown. Government employees, like when this happened to the two of us, you don't get paid. You worry about how you're going to put food on the table. But he can tear down the White House. Boy, is that a message.
Yeah, it certainly is. And let's talk about the stakes here as well, because you go into quite a bit of detail on that. We all saw Stephen Miller on CNN accidentally let slip that the president has plenary power.
Yes.
And right now we're seeing that play out in the courts, where Donald Trump and the Trump administration feels that they have plenary power unreviewable by the courts. And you are so familiar with this terminology as former U.S. attorney, former prosecutor, and professor, right? That that's the stakes, the danger of the courts, possibly the Supreme Court, granting this president plenary power. We already saw a little taste of it when he tried to fire some members of multi-member boards against something called Humphrey's executor, which we know that the Supreme Court conservative majority doesn't like very much, unless it's the Fed, right? Which they've said in rulings, particularly in the Gwen Wilcox, Kathy Harris National Labor Relations Board, Merit Systems Protection Board ruling, but that he wants this plenary power to just fire members of multi-member boards that are supposed to be independent checks on the executive. And now we're reaching into the ability to deploy troops and National Guard.
Yeah.
And the plenary unreviewable power there by saying, well, the local police can't solve 100% of the crime problems. And since they can only solve 99% of the crime problems, I have the plenary power to decide that I have the power to send in the troops to protect federal property, ICE agents, etc. And I was interested in your thoughts on that because of the stakes that we're talking about here. So we've got the analysis of the problem, and then we are talking about the stakes. Like you said, we're this close to a dictatorship.
So I think you've seized on the most important thread that runs through this entire administration, right? This is Donald Trump versus the Constitution. This is Donald Trump seizing all the power of government. It's what conservatives, admittedly sort of on the far right fringes of the Republican Party for many years, but increasingly moving into the mainstream, call the unitary executive. This idea that the Article 2 branch of government, the executive branch, is more powerful than anyone else. And so we've seen Trump assert it in a number of ways. As you mentioned, he started with this idea, well, I can hire and fire anyone I want to in the executive branch, right? I can fire these people on quasi-independent boards, even if there are rules that say I can't, even if Congress has passed laws. I'm going to do it anyway. And we're now seeing that with United States attorneys, right? Where he is firing U.S. attorneys, replacing them with people who are not Senate confirmed. And so now there's the allegation, both with Alina Habba and in the Eastern District of Virginia, that he's violated the law by doing that. Trump is in court saying, I can do it. I'm the president. And where it's the most dangerous, I think, is this area that you've identified having to do with deploying the National Guard, because Donald Trump has decided that the states can't do their own police work. You know, under the Constitution, that the police power is reserved to the states. The irony that states' rights Republicans are actually in favor of deploying federal or federalizing troops and then deploying them as opposed to letting the states solve their own problems is pretty rich. But that's where we are. And the most important issue that's now being teed up in front of the courts is whether or not the courts have any ability to review Donald Trump's decisions when he says, as he has, there's a rampant crime problem, so I must federalize National Guard troops and send them onto the streets of Chicago and Portland and maybe San Francisco next week. And Donald Trump's argument is, nobody can look over my shoulder and second guess me when I make that assessment. A judge in Chicago has said, not true. We owe you great deference, Mr. President, but that does not mean, in essence, she says, your assessment has to pass the smell test. And here in Chicago, it hasn't done that. The Seventh Circuit agreed. A different result in the Ninth Circuit, though, where that court has recently said, well, because the executive branch's use of its power here has been restrained and proportional to the crisis that they're saying exists, whether we agree or not, sending 200 people in to protect, this federal building seems to be reasonable to us. Look, that's a split in the circuits. If that holds up, maybe the Ninth Circuit will hear that case en banc and we'll get a different result. Either way, this is on a fast track to the Supreme Court. We know it's headed to the Supreme Court. The same court that has said a president can't commit a criminal violation of law when he's conducting official business. They're now going to have to decide whether they want to double down on that and set the president up as this, strong unitary power, really all-encompassing unitary power that seems to me to violate every precept that the founding fathers set forth, or whether the Supreme Court is going to finally tell Donald Trump, no, you answer to the courts.
Yeah, and it can be tough because of the use of the shadow docket, the emergency docket. They've lifted a lot of these temporary restraining orders, which doesn't necessarily mean that that's how they're going to decide on the merits, but it gives the sense that they're allowing the Trump administration to do what they want to do, at least for the time being. And I am especially concerned about the Supreme Court because I've read Elie Mystal's books, about the loopholes in the Constitution that are constantly being taken advantage of by the Supreme Court that likes to continue to backslide into authoritarianism. And it's now we're at this whole plenary power question, and I think that it's especially concerning to me. With the makeup of this particular court, especially, although again they have a history of doing wrong things, but this particular makeup of the Supreme Court, especially. And I wanted to get back to the book for a second because it's not just you saying, "Yeah, this is awful," and terrible things could happen, and terrible things are happening by, you have very, very concrete things that can be done. This is a guidebook. It's a handbook, right? It's like, because the question I get most when I do town halls, when I speak at events, when I people send messages and emails into the podcasts. The question is always, what can I do? And instead of saying, well, just fight, people
Mhm.
want concrete steps they can take. I often compare this administration to a house in an episode of Hoarders, where you walk in and it's so chaotic and it's such a mess and it's so overwhelming that it's hard to imagine what you can possibly do. And, I always say, pick a corner and start cleaning. And so that's kind of what I'm finding in your book. So talk a little bit about the answer to that question, what can we do? Because it's on everyone's lips.
Yeah, I mean, Ruth Ben-Ghiat writes with so much scholarly authority in her book Strong Men about this deliberate strategy dictators use, right? They try to overwhelm us so we feel like there's no way we can fight back. And the first step is understanding that that's the playing field, that you actually have to, clear a little bit of space, work in one of your corners for starters, and understand that they are trying to overwhelm you and you must not permit that to happen. So, my view is that we are the cavalry. We have to be done with waiting for somebody to come in and save us. That's not happening. We're going to save ourselves. Um, and I think there are a lot of positive steps, but the one that I want to talk about that I think is the most important is revitalizing our notion of civics education, because understanding how our institutions work and how, for instance, we're going to protect the 2026 elections so that we can start rebuilding guardrails against this president, that I think is critically important. And sure, we all get civics education in fourth grade or sixth grade. But what we have to do is start committing to it as a whole of community effort. And let me give you a really specific example, because the biggest challenge that we are going to face in 2026 is proving we are citizens so that we can vote. That's clearly Donald Trump's agenda. And it's expensive to prove that you're a citizen. It means, in essence, that you have to have a passport. There are some other documents. They can be more difficult to get. Passport is a safe bet, and it costs just shy of $200. That may mean that as communities, we have to pull together and find ways for everybody to get the documentation they need and be able to get a passport so that every American citizen can go in and vote. And look, voting is a right, not a privilege. We should not have to jump through those hoops. But the reality is that we may well have to. We should face that reality and work together. That's an everyday expression of our civic value. And then, Allison, if I can just, one more thing that I increasingly think about that's really important. I live in a red state. I've got 2 Republican senators. They don't listen to me when I write to them, but I do keep up a running dialogue with them on their websites. We have got to increasingly work together in community to demand of those senators and those members of Congress that they represent us. Look, they serve everybody in their states, not just the people who voted for them or the people who they want to claim as their own. They're obligated to hear our voices. We're entitled to get answers from them. Why do you continue to support Robert Kennedy, who's making it impossible, for me to protect my family through vaccinations? I think we are going to have to take it to them in large numbers and insist that they behave with greater responsibility. I am done with giving them a pass and just saying, oh, I have 2 red senators and throwing my hands up in the air. This is not the fight any of us wanted, but it's the fight we have.
Yeah, I remember talking to Judge Ludick, who reminded me that the strongest, uh, or most power that we have, the strongest check on the executive is the people. And I remember writing back when I was a long time ago when I was doing the Mueller She Wrote podcast, and people were sending me Mueller prayer candles and Mueller rosaries and God bless Mueller and everything that I had said and I had written. Look, there, we are the Muellers that we've been waiting for. Do not rely on a single prosecutor to save democracy. And I put out a tweet. We are the Muellers we've been waiting for. Like, it's us, and it always has been. And I think that people who generally are like, somebody else will solve this. for us, are now taking to the streets, understanding that it is our government, that it does belong to us. That White House that he just tore down the East Wing for, that's our house. And we need to stand up. And I think that we showed that. We showed that at No Kings One when we had 5 million people turn out. We showed it here. We have 7 or 8 million people turning out. I think that we might get up around 9 or 10 in the spring when we do it again, and then all converge together right before the midterms. But you're right. It's the idea is to discourage us. And that's why the giving up is unforgivable is such a powerful book and a powerful idea. And I think it's the underpinning of the entire book is that we do have to do something, but not just telling people to do something. Here are some things that you can do. And I think that that's really amazing. And I thank you so much for writing this. Is it your first book?
First book, and thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it. I have so much faith in us. I mean, here we are, almost 2,500 of us in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday. I hope I haven't lost track of days of the week. We are actually civics education happening, right? We are this nation coming together in the way the founding fathers envisioned. And what I know about us is we are not quitters. We will not give up. We will find a way to do this. It may not be pretty, but we will come out of this on the other side with an intact democracy.
Yeah, I agree. And for more civics education, you can subscribe to Civil Discourse by Joyce Vance. And then you can get the book wherever you get your books. I like to go to my little independent bookstore and order it from them. And I usually order about 10 or 20 copies so that I can give them out as gifts at the holiday times and then put them in my little free libraries around my neighborhood. So however you get your books, I highly recommend picking this one up. Tell us about it one last time and where people can find and follow you.
So it is Giving Up is Unforgivable, a manual for keeping a democracy. Like AG, I'm a huge fan of small bookstores. And so if you look it up online, you'll actually see links to indie booksellers along with the usual suspects. And you can also find me on Substack, where I'm Civil Discourse or Joyce Vance. You can subscribe for free. I hope that you will. And thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Yes, thank you everybody for being here. Really appreciate it. Just these little things are acts of resistance. Find your corner, start cleaning, and grab a copy of Giving Up is Unforgivable. Thanks everybody for joining us today on The Breakdown. We'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.